So this video is going to be about my recommendations for what to start with when you're starting off with film photography. So firstly, if you don't have a simple SLR that takes 35 millimeters, you're going to want to try to find one, basically. A lot of your friends, family, people like that have these in their attics, their basements. Try to go for the attics over the basements because basements kind of get moisture usually has a pretty horrible effect on these type of cameras because they have a lot of moving parts and springs and little doodads and stuff like that. They can kind of get jammed up. So, but if you ask around, guaranteed you're going to be able to find somebody that has one of these that doesn't want them anymore. And good news is a lot of times they come with a really awesome strap. This one's leather. Ooh. And a lot of times they'll come with a 50 millimeter prime lens, or a lot of them come with these filters. I don't know, back in the day they must have gotten a commish at the camera stores if they sold a filter. They always have filters on it. It's kind of funny actually. So some of the ones that I've ended up with over the years are the Pentax K1000, Olympus OM2, and what's this? And a Minolta SRT SC2. So basically you're looking for anything that has limited function. You want control, but you don't want, I mean the OM2 is has too many functions. I almost wouldn't recommend it because of that, because you can put it in auto and stuff like that. Starting off, you don't want that. Don't get anything with bells and whistles if you have to buy. My top choice is K1000. All day. They're awesome. So after you get your camera, you're going to want to learn everything about it before you put film in it. Because the second you put film in it, you're gonna be like, oh wait, how do you do this or that? And you're gonna screw something up. First thing you wanna do is figure out how to open the back. A lot of them are, you pull up on the advanced knob. You're gonna wanna open it up. I mean, it helps to look around and make sure that everything works on it too. That's another good reason just to play around with it. A good test of like, is this camera working, is to throw it in bulb mode, which is a B on the shutter speed dial. And bulb just means that as long as you hold down the shutter release button, the shutter curtains will be open. So basically, open up the back, look in, put it in bulb, and make sure that the shutter opens, closes, everything like that. It helps to go through the shutter speeds and make sure none of them stick, but without more sophisticated type of like measuring equipment, it's hard to tell whether a 60th of a second is slow or fast. But it does help to just go through the shutter speeds. Obviously you'll be able to, look at a 1 second exposure and make sure that it stays open for about a second. Usually you hear a little buzzing noise. And also the faster shutter speeds, again, you're not gonna be able to tell per se if it's a thousandth of a second, but it should be very, very quick. You almost shouldn't be able to see it go unless you're looking through the back, and you should like barely see it flash. So the other thing you're gonna wanna make sure works is the film advance. So if you put the film in one side and it advances on the other side, you're gonna wanna make sure that the part that advances spins when you cock the shutter. Obviously every camera is different, but usually you can pretty much tell if something's jammed up. If something in there is like grinding or anything like that, you probably are gonna wanna get it serviced. So the next thing you're gonna wanna make sure of is everything about all the dials and buttons. So make sure you know where the aperture, shutter speed, and focus, and more importantly, the ISO dial. So you're gonna have to change the ISO dial on the camera itself so the meter inside knows what speed is inside the camera. Otherwise, it's gonna give you not a correct meter reading. So on the K1000s, you pull up on this little ring here and you dial in, whatever speed is inside the camera. I can't stress that enough because I don't know how many times I've put film into a camera and then forgot what's inside after I put it down or something like that. So it really helps to write a note. A lot of times there's cameras with a little, I don't know what it's called, a little frame thing that you would take the back of the film label, and then you'd put it in there so you know what's inside. So you can remember it was Kodak or, you know, 400 yada yada, whatever. So you can remember what's inside, because you'd be surprised of how many times you forget, or at least I do. So the next thing you want to take into consideration, especially if you're coming from a digital background, is these lenses have no image stabilization at all. So a lot of times when you shoot on digital, you can handhold slower shutter speeds. So these lenses don't have anything like that. So the general rule is whatever your focal length is, you're gonna wanna shoot with a shutter speed over 1 second of what the focal length is, which sounds confusing, but basically if you're shooting with a 50mm lens, try to shoot above 1/50th of a second. Now that doesn't sound too bad, but when you get into like this lens, which is, I think it's 135. Yeah, 135. You're gonna wanna shoot with, so 135, I mean, I would shoot 200th at least of a second for this. I would round up. Hand-holding stuff isn't as easy as it looks. And honestly, there's nothing worse than getting your photos back and your first roll of film, everything is blurry because you can't handhold. So either shoot with a tripod or stick to that rule, basically. So the first thing I want to talk about is how your meter interprets the scene and how it comes up with its meter reading, because it's super important to know when to compensate. So basically you need to know that your meter looks at the entire scene. So if there's a bright area and a dark area, it's gonna try to get a medium in between that. So it doesn't know what your subject is. So in this scene, if your subject is the person right here, your camera is looking at the whole scene and it thinks that the bright area is just as important as the dark area. So you know that the dark area is the part that's important to you. So basically you need to overexpose the scene because you don't care about that highlight, you care about the shadows. So a good way to know what your subject is gonna look like in a backlit situation is to point your camera and fill up the whole frame with a part of something that's in the shadows. So once you have your settings for your shadowed area, you can almost move your frame over to the subject that you want that's backlit, and your subject should be the same almost value as that shadowy area that you metered off of. So even though the new frame is telling you that it's too bright, your subject will be just as exposed as that shadowy area. Hopefully that makes sense. So one thing you definitely want to do when you start shooting with film is start off using only natural light. Don't bother trying to learn flash right off the bat or anything like that. Just go outside, use the sun. Shade is always a very even exposure, so you can learn a lot using shade and then using kind of directional light, that kind of thing. So I'm gonna show you one thing that I shot, and actually this is a really good example of how shooting film actually slows you down in like a good way. So this is a shoot that I did with a model named Deb. So the light actually, the sun was behind her, but it was coming in and hitting kind of a window and then coming back on that kind of stair area. So you really want to take your time, hone in on focus, especially if you're shooting at wider apertures. So this is another good example of the light being behind her. So the light's behind her, there is a lot of light on her, but I definitely overexposed. So the meter said it was actually too bright, so I was compensating for that light behind her and exposing for more her face, which was darker than the entire scene. So here's another one. She's totally in the shade of the building on this one. So this one, I'm sure I metered directly what the meter was telling me when I pointed it at this scene. So at whatever settings my camera said that the scene was exposed properly is what I went with. As you can see, she's totally in the shade. It's a very even exposure. There's no light behind her. I mean, in this frame of the fisheye lens of the GoPro, you can see the sun, but my frame, as you can see, is totally in that shadow, so it's very even. So after you familiarize yourself with what the camera does, how it works, everything about it, you're gonna wanna go out and get some film. I would have to say my favorite is black and white, 400 to 800. Tri-X is pretty great. Honestly, start out with whatever is like the cheapest. Black and white film, 400, 800, something like that. Just get it and start shooting. So each camera does it a little bit different, but once you're done with your roll of film, you're gonna need to wind it back up into the 35mm canister. So K1000s, you push this button and you hold it down, and then you lift up this right here, and then you wind backwards everything that you shot back into the canister. So normally if you don't push the button, this doesn't have the capability to wind back up, which is a good safety feature. So I gotta say, I think every photographer should at least shoot a little bit of film. So as long as you don't shoot too much crap, it's not actually the most expensive hobby you could have. But I think the benefits of slowing down, appreciating what features your DSLR has is really important. So get out there and shoot.